Hi beautiful, welcome to my channel. In today's video, as you saw in the title, we are going to declutter, hypothetically, one palette from my favorite brands. I do declutters quite often. I don't necessarily ever keep palettes that I am not interested in. I always try and pass them along if I know I'm not getting use out of them and whatnot. So I feel like this is a little bit of a challenging one because I don't actually want to get rid of any of these, but if I had to, these would be the ones to go because I like the rest of them in each brand a little bit more than these. I'm super excited about today's video, so if you like it, don't forget to please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe before you leave. This was not my video idea. I actually saw the beautiful Angelica Nickvis doing this on her channel. She got inspired by glitter fallout, and I believe that the creator of the concept is Body Bean, so I'm going to tag Angelica and glitter fallout and Body Bean all down below in case you want to see other people struggling to justify hypothetically getting rid of palettes. I have 10 brands in front of me. I only chose brands from which I have several palettes and brands that are my favorites. When it came to Huda Beauty, Pat McGrath, and Natasha Denona, I wasn't sure if I wanted to declutter one of like the smaller palettes or the big ones, so I challenged myself a little extra by just picking one of the big ones to declutter because I felt like that would be a little bit more fun, but I didn't do that with every brand because there were some other ones where I was like, there is no way I would get rid of any of these big ones. I would get rid of the smaller one most likely, if I'm going to be honest with myself. Anyways, let's get started with the first brand. Let's do Urban Decay first, and if I had to get rid of any of my Urban Decay palettes, I would get rid of this one here. This is the Naked Wild West palette from Urban Decay, and I know the exterior packaging of this palette is glorious. I agree. I love it too. And then here is what it looks like on the inside. It is a beautiful palette full of really nice nude shades with a few pops of color back here. The formula isn't the greatest, but it's not a bad formula at all, and I've created some beautiful looks with this palette. Now the reason that if I had to declutter any I would be getting rid of this one is because I don't have the biggest Urban Decay collection, but I have palettes like the original Naked palette, the Naked 3 palette, and the Born to Run palette, and there is no way, there is zero ways that I would get rid of any of those because those are some of my most favorite palettes, and palettes that hold a lot of like nostalgia for me, especially when it comes to the Naked palette and the Naked 3 palette. I don't think I will ever get rid of those because that is where all of my luxury high-end palette obsession came from. And then this one right here, to be completely honest with you, I have not really used that much since it came out. I used it to film my little review video. Maybe I created some looks with it, I'm not entirely sure. And I remember that while I didn't tell you guys it was terrible because I don't think it's terrible, I wasn't like overly excited about it. And so for that reason, if I had to get rid of any of my Urban Decay palettes, this one right here would be the one to go. Do I want to get rid of it? No. Am I going to get rid of it? No. But if I had to, hypothetically, this one right here would be the one to go. Let's move on to Kaleidos, and let me tell you, for this one I had to pick a little one because I am obsessed with majority of my Kaleidos palettes, and the more shades they have, the more excited I am about them, to be completely honest with you. None of the Kaleidos palettes are overwhelmingly large. They all have like a good amount of shades. Anyway, so the one that I would get rid of from Kaleidos, which I don't want to get rid of, it's new and I really don't want to get rid of it, but if I had to it would be this one here. This is from their newest collection, and this one is the like black and gray palette. Let me tell you, this palette has a magnificent formula. These shades are buttery, they are blendable, they are pigmented. I had no trouble creating the most glamorous dark black smoky eye with a silver glitter on the eyelid with this one. It is so easy to use. However, these are not shades that I go for that often. Even though this palette has the most amazing quality, I very rarely go for a black smoky eye or a black with silver smoky eye. These are just not colors that I'm super drawn to. It would have to be a special occasion or a specific outfit, maybe something like that would have to be the reason why I would reach for this palette. But on a day-to-day basis or to create videos, I'm much more of a lighter color, brown color, pastel, pink, and warm shades and whatnot. But it's very rare that I would go for a color story like this one. So while this palette has the most pigmented gunmetal silvery shimmer and some really stunning matte shades, like, quality is there, but I would miss it less than the rest of my Kaleidos palettes because this is not something that I see myself reaching for that often. So this one would be the one to go. Let's continue, and the next brand I want to talk about is Charlotte Tilbury. Now, Charlotte Tilbury has her 12 pan palettes and her 4 pan palettes. I really love all of my 12 pan palettes from Charlotte, and I find them very easy to use, very glamorous, very versatile. Obsessed with those. So I thought I would probably be much more likely to get rid of a quad. Now, this one I chose has actually been discontinued, so I guess I'm not the only one who prefers it less in comparison to her other palettes. But the one that I would declutter is this one here. This is the original Rebel palette from Charlotte. It has these more emerald green shades rather than the olive greens that come in her current Rebel palette, and this palette is beautiful, but I don't know, for some reason this is again not a color story that I reach for that often. I feel like when it comes to blues and greens, I have a love-hate relationship with them. I feel like there is very specific hues of those colors that I gravitate towards, and for some reason this one right here is just not it for me. So yeah, that is the reason why I would be getting rid of the Rebel palette. The rest of my Charlotte Tilbury quads are just better than this one in my opinion, and they have color stories that I am much more likely to wear. So let's give this one a theoretical farewell. And by the way, the only reason I haven't actually decluttered this one is because for some of my favorite brands, which Charlotte Tilbury is one of my favorite eyeshadow brands, I want to have as much variety in the palettes as possible so that I can do rankings videos and swatch comparisons and all of that. So if tomorrow Charlotte decides to come out with like another green palette, I have this one to compare the new shades to and tell you guys whether or not to go for it in comparison and whatnot. So that is the true reason that I don't declutter this one, but it's honestly not really one of my favorite palettes. Okay, so next we are going to get into some ABH, and ABH is probably one of the brands that I have been collecting for the longest time. So I have a lot of ABH palettes. I included the Norvina palettes in the mix as if it all was one brand, and then I decided, well, I haven't decided yet. I have 2 palettes I'm going to show you because they're like the bottom of the palettes, and I'm not sure still which one I would choose to declutter, but I wanted to show you them both. It's in between. This one right here, this is the Prism palette. This was a limited edition palette, not very popular, I don't think. And this is what the inside looks like right here. And then the other palette that I would consider decluttering would be this one right here. First of all, looking at this color story now, I feel like this palette was ahead of its time because this color story is magnificent, and I think I thought so when it came out, but I feel like these colors are a lot more trendy now than they were when it first came out. So color story wise, I think I would probably declutter this one and keep this one. However, the formulas in this palette are so finicky. I think that they started experimenting with like some pigments and stuff, and it just did not work well. A lot of the shades that come in the Subculture palette become muddy when mixed with one another, or sometimes they fade and it becomes this like blotchy mess on your crease. So you have to be extremely careful when working with this palette to like truly make it work. However, I absolutely love the shades in this one. Obviously, I don't want to declutter either one of these, and I'm not planning to, but if I had to, you know what? finicky formula and all, I think I would actually declutter the Prism palette. And the reason is that I feel like majority of the shades that come in this palette I could probably find very similar shades to in other palettes in my collection, while I believe that the shades that come in this palette right here, they might be hard to work with but are a lot more unique. So I think I would keep this one, and then the Prism palette would be the one to go. The next brand I'm going to talk about is Viseart, and I have accumulated quite a few Viseart palettes. Not like all of them, they have so many. I have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 Viseart palettes total, and I have all kinds of like pan sizes. I have some of the ones that are more so created for makeup artists. I have some of the more consumer geared ones, and then I have some little ones, and out of all of them I believe that I would probably declutter a little one because I would miss it less. Again, just like with the Kaleidos palette, that was my reasoning behind this choice. And the Viseart palette that I would declutter would be this one right here. This is the Petite 4 in the color Bouillon. I'm not sure how to say that, but this is the palette right here that I would declutter. It has 3 different shades of gold and a matte black shade. I feel like a matte black shade may be in different quality or whatnot, but it is a very common shade, and then so is gold. So I'm sure that somewhere else in my collection I could find shades that are pretty much exactly like the shades that this palette has. And then the other reason I would declutter it, it's because I feel like when using this palette I would need to pull a transition color from a different palette in order to like truly make it work for me. When I reviewed this palette, I told you guys it's missing some sort of transition because I'm not exactly sure how to go from like gold to black and like combine this palette in a way that would make sense to me. I would need to pull a transition shade from somewhere. So because of all of those reasons, I think this one right here would be the one to go. I think it's a beautiful palette. The shimmer formulas in this palette are so soft, so pigmented, so beautiful, and so is the matte black. Very black, very blendable. I love it, but I would definitely miss this palette less if I were to declutter it than any of the other Viseart palettes in my collection. So I think this would be the one to go. Let's talk about Odins Eye next, and you guys know I am obsessed with Odins Eye's eyeshadows. The immediate rule out was any of their collaboration palettes because I love them all. They have the best formulas and color stories, so I would be keeping all of my Odins Eye collaborations palettes because they are literally my favorite from the brand. And so then I was looking at all of the rest of their individual palettes they have released that I have kept because they have sent me a lot of their makeup, like all of their like full collections of palettes and whatnot, and I don't need it all. So the palettes that I haven't felt the most attracted to, I've given to friends and family already. So all of the ones I have in my collection currently are palettes that I truly like, which made this decision a little bit harder, but I decided that if I had to declutter an Odins Eye palette from what is currently in my collection, the one to go would be this one here. I'm sad about it, I don't want it to go, but this one would be the one that I would make the very hard choice to part with. This is the Saga of Freya palette, Chapter 2, Cat with Golden Carriage. I love the packaging of this one because it just feels like a vintage book. But when it comes to the color story, I love it. Why would I get rid of it? I love it. I don't know. See, this is why this is hard. I would not get rid of this palette. I absolutely love it. I'm trying to like find things to say about this one that would make me want to get rid of it, but I truly can't. And that is why I wouldn't get rid of it. But I love the rest of them even more than I love this one. Okay, I remember something. I feel like Bad Temper right here, while it's like one of my favorite shades, sometimes can like overtake the rest of the shades that come in this palette and make the look very like focused on this type of shade, and it doesn't let the other colors shine as much. I remember when I tried this one in my review video, I did a look where it was like a lot of bad temper, and I liked it, but it wasn't me enough. It was like very, very green. It didn't let the mint shades shine as much. Honestly, that is all I got. That is the only reason why I would get rid of this one over the rest of them, but honestly, like I said, I wouldn't, because I absolutely love this palette. It has some really fabulous minty shades and some really, really fun shimmers as well. Oh yeah, look at that. It's so, so pretty. Anyways, I wouldn't actually get rid of this palette. That is why I have it. But if I had to, that would be the one that I would probably have a little bit of an easier time parting with. Let's move on to Huda Beauty, and I feel like it would have been easier for me to get rid of one of my Obsessions palettes from Huda Beauty. I have a lot of Obsessions palettes from Huda Beauty, but I wanted to go for a big one. And when it came to Huda, Natasha, and McGrath, which are my favorite brands, and I have a lot of large palettes and a lot of smaller palettes too, I was really trying to challenge myself and hypothetically get rid of one of the big palettes, right? So with Huda Beauty, I chose to part ways with my original Rose Gold palette. So this was the first palette Huda Beauty ever came out with. I'm pretty sure that when she launched this one, she didn't have any Obsessions palettes yet. And this was kind of at the beginnings of the Huda Beauty line, and to be completely honest with you, the formula in this palette is not as good as the formula in the rest of my Huda Beauty palettes, which is the reason she discontinued this one and then relaunched it with a new formula. I never got the new palette with the new formula because I had already spent $65 on this one, so in my opinion it was like kind of shitty that she did that. And I never got the new palette because I had all the shades. The palette, like color stories, didn't really change that much. The formulas was the thing that did. So anyways, all of that would be the reason why this one would be the one that I would part ways with. Plus it's probably expired by now because I've had it for a very, very long time, and since it never had a great formula to begin with, it's just not that good anymore. So I love my Huda Beauty palettes. She is one of my favorite brands when it comes to eyeshadows, but this one would go. 3 more brands to go, and the next one I want to talk about is Nomad Cosmetics. I have only 4 of the Nomad Cosmetics palettes, but I really, really like their formulas, and I spoke to you guys about the brand recently, and so for that reason I wanted to include them in this video. Obviously, thank God, this is all hypothetical because I do not want to get rid of any of my Nomad Cosmetic palettes, but and this was a tough decision. Let me just show you. Anyways, the one that I would get rid of would be the Iceland Fire and Ice palette. Now this was a very, very tough decision because I feel like out of all of the eyeshadow looks that I did with Nomad Cosmetics, the eyeshadow look that I created with this palette was definitely one of my favorites. However, whenever I look at this palette, like color story wise, I'm like a little overwhelmed, and I know that I created that look using the best shades that in my opinion this palette has to offer, but at the same time there is a lot of shades in this palette that I don't see myself really getting use out of. Like this whole row right here, I'm not sure what I would do with, and then it's kind of sometimes a little hard to combine the oranges with the very cool tone shades that the palette has, and it's very blue and green, so that is also like not my favorite color story. I was debating whether I would get rid of this one or the pastel palette because quality wise I feel like the pastel palette's quality isn't as good as this one, but I do really enjoy the shades that come in the pastel palette so much more that I would rather keep that palette and have to work harder at making that formula work for me than this palette, with which I'm not as inspired. And that seems to be kind of a theme with me now that I realize, because earlier I said I would get rid of the Prism palette from ABH because the color story is more uninspiring than the Subculture, even though the Subculture also has a formula that I'm not in love with. So I guess I would rather have a palette palette that I'm more inspired by, even if I have to work a little harder at making it work, than a palette that overwhelms me or in which the color story doesn't inspire me as much. So unfortunately the Iceland Fire and Ice palette would be the one that I would part with. But thank God I don't have to do that, because I actually really like this palette and I definitely want to keep it. I wouldn't get rid of it, but if I had to, that would be the one. Okay, let's do Pat McGrath next and leave Natasha Denona for last. Now I feel like the Pat McGrath one you guys can probably guess, because I forced myself to get rid of a mothership palette like the $125 ones. I didn't want to take the easy way out and get rid of a quad, which would have been easier. Anyways, if I had to get rid of a mothership palette, it actually wasn't that bad, because I have told you guys before how much I dislike. I don't actually dislike it, but in comparison to the other mothership palettes from Pat McGrath, this one is significantly less attractive to me than the rest of them. So anyways, the one that I would get rid of is this one right here. This is the Pat McGrath Mothership 4 Decadence palette. This is what the box looks like, and this is what the actual palette looks like right here. The main reason why this would be the palette from Pat McGrath that I would part ways with is that all of the shades are these exact same formula kind of. They're all shimmers, there is no glitters and no mattes in this palette. So I feel like it is a good palette to have if you're looking for like a specific shade. But when I did a 5 looks 1 palette with this one, it was incredibly hard to combine these shades in ways that I found inspiring. I honestly don't get too inspired about this palette, because in order for me to do so, I want my palettes to have different textures that I can combine to create more depth or more texture, etc. And since this palette doesn't really have any matte shades or any like glittery shades, then this one would be the one that I would part ways with. Plus, this is the only mothership palette that comes in this format that doesn't have Blitz Astral shades. And if you've watched my videos before, you know how I feel about Blitz Astral shades. They are the main reason why Pat McGrath is one of my all-time favorite eyeshadow brands, because she makes the best glittery shades, and they usually come in these palettes, but this one doesn't have them. And so therefore the Decadence palette would have to go bye-bye. So the 10th brand that I'm going to talk about is Natasha Denona. And with Natasha Denona, like I said, I didn't want to get rid of a little palette. I wanted to hypothetically get rid of a large palette from her. The Natasha Denona palette I would get rid of if I had to. And this is obviously not a palette I actually want to get rid of, but if I had to, this is the one that I would probably miss the least, is the Natasha Denona Love palette. This palette is beautiful, but I feel like there's a very specific time of year to wear it. I like this palette for like February. I think it's the reds and the purples. I like the pinks and the champagnes that come in this palette, but like this color here, Heartbeat, I don't really use those shades that often. The color Heart, which is a pretty like just plain red color on my eyes, meh. So it's like okay, but kind of a similar color story. And then the colors Dream and Trust, I don't remember like falling in love with. So I think out of all of my 15 pan eyeshadow palettes from Natasha Denona, this is the color story that inspires me the least, and therefore if I had to, I would declutter this one. But honestly, I don't really want to, mainly because I have all of the midi palettes from Natasha Denona, all of the ones that are $65 that come in this size I own, and I wouldn't want to like not have this one in my collection, again for comparison purposes and ranking purposes and whatnot, but also because I might reach for this one every once in a while too. But again, I feel like I would miss this one a lot less than I would the rest of the Natasha Denona palettes in my collection. This was such a fun video to film. I feel like it's very hard to pick your least favorite palette, because all of the palettes that I own, even though there is a lot of them, I really like. That's the reason I keep them. When I don't like them, or I know for sure I'm not going to use them or need them, I give them away. So all of these are technically palettes that I love, and so to pick your least favorite love is very, very challenging. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to please give it a thumbs up before you leave. And if you want to watch more content like this one, check the description box down below so you can watch Angelica's video, Glitter Fallout's video, or Betty Bean's video and see what palettes they would hypothetically declutter from their favorite brands if they had to. I love you guys so much. Don't forget to please subscribe before you leave. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope to see you back in the next one. Bye.